Finally, a book with real magic. Let's get into it. Welcome to Reading Crossbow. My name is Rob, and today I'm doing my midpoint review on The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. This is a historical romance fantasy set during the golden age of Spain. And this has been actually a pretty really interesting read so far. I've actually been really excited to actually see some real magic in our books, unlike a lot of our recent books, which really didn't have much magic, or they had magic that was basically just superpowers. This actually has spells. So that's actually kind of curious considering it's a historical fiction um, set in essentially the real world. So I don't know. This has been a kind of a really interesting book. But before I actually talk about the plot, one thing we haven't talked about much is actually the books themselves. I actually really like this book. The so it's hard to see here, but the cover, like it has, it's embossed. It has this reflective chain, which is the only part on this cover that's real reflective. The rest of the cover is actually very matte finish. And so by having just that one piece being reflective, it makes that chain kind of stand out. And the chain's actually very symbolic for both of the two kind of central characters of this story. So I found that to be really interesting. On the inside of the book, there is bunch of pomegranates on the inside. It's really nice, decorative color cover, interior, and the pomegranates are related to this story, and as well as there's a lot of historical and mythological references to pomegranates that is also referenced in the story. So I found that to be really kind of neat. This edition has a black edge painted. And what I thought was really cool was right here on the cover. I don't know if there's any way it'll show up on camera, but there is a debossed pomegranate shape right here on the cover where they pressed in a stylized pomegranate into the cover. I haven't seen much of that kind of work done on books. Obviously, I've seen it before, but not very often. So I actually found this whole kind of book itself to actually be really really nice. Very kind of aesthetically pleasing book. But what about the words? That's the big question here. Is it a good book, or is it a book that maybe isn't for me or for you? So I guess let's talk about this book. So as Lana mentioned last week, and I brought up again a few minutes ago, this is a historical fantasy. It's set in our world during the Spanish Golden Age. The Spanish Golden Age basically spans from the discovery of the New World to basically the rise of the age of piracy. I actually kind of got that wrong last week. I kind of thought the age of piracy overlapped a bit with the golden age of Spain, but essentially the rise of piracy kind of spells the end of the golden age of Spain because the pirates are basically interfering with their mass looting of the New World, taking all that gold and silver and other resources from the New World and bringing it back to Spain. Once the privateers get brought in and that kind from other nations like England, it kind of shut down that heavy looting of the New World, and now Spain had to deal with its own economy, and so it no longer was this filthy rich economy that it was during its golden age. So this book is kind of set kind of in the middle of that age based on some of the context clues in the story. So it's interesting that there's magic because, there's not really magic in the real world. And this definitely has magic, and it's supposed to be, at least it's implied to be, our world. So the main character, Lucia, she is Jewish by heritage. However, her ancestors, I think it was her grandparents or her parents, were forcibly converted to Catholicism by the Inquisition. She doesn't have a lot of understanding of like Jewish beliefs, and she really doesn't have a lot of people to discuss such things with because being Jewish or Muslim or just or Protestant at this time in Spain was a crime, one that you could be punished extremely severely for. So her magic essentially comes from the fact that she has this awareness and knowledge of other languages, specifically Hebrew and Latin. So the way she casts magic is she chants these kind of poetic phrases, and an effect will happen kind of loosely tied to that phrase. So she'll sing a song and something will heal or get better, or she can chant a different song and fire will become more energetic or just come into being. Like she can light candles or. And for the most part, she spent her life just keeping this as a secret little talent. She uses it to just make her life a little bit easier because her life, she is a poor scullion, a kitchen servant. She's not even the chef, she's just the helper for a lower tier noble family. So, what I mean by lower tier noble family is they basically only have two employees, at least as far as the story is concerned. There might be some more that are out in the olive grove, but they don't pertain to the story at all. So Lucia uses her magic, as I mentioned, just to kind of make her life a little bit easier. So as the story moves forward, the Lucia actually starts to get instruction about her magic and how to make it bigger and more exciting as the story progresses. And that's actually where I can really say that this went from just being maybe another superpower magic to being what I would consider a magic system, because this other person, despite not knowing how she does her magic, is able to guess and says, well, I'm pretty sure you use a language. Which language are you using? And she's like, Spanish? And he's like, no, Spanish isn't a magic language. You're using another one. Maybe it's Latin or Hebrew or or Greek. And he mentions a couple different languages, and she's like, well, in a way, I use many languages. I think she said part of that I think is true, but she also is disguising the fact that a lot of her magic comes from her Hebrew. By the fact that he's able to guess that this is a language based thing and predict that means that there is other magic out in the world and other people are casting magic in a similar manner. And that's what really makes me feel like, yes, this is definitely a magic system in a magical world. And you actually get a couple other magical people in this story. So you see the king, he'd received a prophecy from a fortune teller who told him, essentially predicted that his fleet, which was going to sail against England, was going to sink. And sure enough, it did. And he's really, really pissed. And that fortune teller's gone, and he's kind of put out feelers through his nobility of, I want a new magic person to help me and be God's representative. He's basically looking for almost a prophet, a conduit to God. And because if there's magic out there, it's coming from one of two sources, and one of them's okay, and the other one, the Inquisition's gonna get you. So he kind of put out some feelers to his nobles and said, I want more. And so several nobles are basically competing to try to bring him the next magic person. And Lucia, she is one of these contestants in this competition. There are a couple other contestants. Like one, he does magic, or he does music, and the music's, at least so far, hasn't had a lot of really impressive effects, other than just listening to his music almost put people into a trance, or almost made them just love him so much. So there is an effect that's happening, as well as he can seemingly play any instrument handed to him. At least that's what they say. And then there's another person in this competition, and they are also a fortune teller. They can, through their, they talk to angels, and the angels tell them information about the future, normally through dreams. Lastly, there's a supernatural creature, the titular familiar. And I don't need to talk about what that means too much, at least at this review. But like, I grew up playing D&D, and a familiar is definitely like, that's the little helper for a wizard, you know. And this isn't that, but it definitely kind of gives you an idea of there's a kind of servile relationship between the familiar and their master. And so, um, between multiple magic systems and magical creature, this is definitely a magic book. And everything about it still says this could be in our world. And, I think that's actually really neat. I think this has been a fun read so far, as far as for the magic system goes. So if you're new here, each month, Lena and I each pick a book. I normally pick something more towards a grim dark, and Lena, she normally picks something more on the romantasy, fantasy romance type stories. And so each we'll both read each other's books, and whoever didn't pick the book does the midway review on the books, and that's why I'm reviewing this book, The Familiar. Whereas later this month, Lena will be reading my book, doing the midpoint review. And then after we've done our midpoint reviews, each will come back together and we'll review the finale of the book together and kind of give our thoughts and rate the book. So the reason why I kind of mention that right now is I mentioned Lena normally picks romantasy, and this is definitely, par for the course for her. This has a romance subplot to the story. And just to kind of give you an idea of the kind of story this is. So Lucia is a, pretty sheltered, innocent, virgin character. Very religious, pious, but she does have this little bit of magic to her. And her romantic interest in this story, let me see if I get this right. He's pale. He's centuries old. He thinks she smells like orange blossoms, despite the fact she doesn't use perfume of any kind because she can't afford it. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not a big fan of that subplot. I really kind of hoped that the whole young girl, ancient dude was kind of ruined, by the Twilight Saga, with its multiple ancient guy and young and teenager, or teenager and, toddler romance. Multiple of those, actually. I'd really kind of hope this whole trope is done. Like, a lot of people didn't react, or at least some people didn't react well, especially to the werewolf angle in those books. And I was kind of hoping this whole thing was just done, and we wouldn't have to be dealing with this kind of story anymore. This is an irritating and, frustrating trope, and I'm not a big fan of this one. And this isn't necessarily this writer. This is just the type of story that this is. I really don't like the January December romance stories. I think that's kind of just creepy as fuck. Um, I kind also like different religious figures who did child brides have been going to prison lately, so I was kind of hoping maybe that would send this trope to its grave. And unfortunately, that's not the case. Now, it's possible. Maybe there's going to be a subversion of that trope. I'm only halfway through. I'm at, I think, chapter 27 in the book. And so I don't know what's going to happen going forward. And so maybe this is going to somehow subvert that storyline because, as far as at this point in the story, the romance is just kind of a simmering thing. It actually hasn't happened yet. No one's declared their affections. But, when you got ancient, pale, immortal guy, sniffing the girl and be like, oh, she smells like orange blossoms. It's not a big fan. There is a different romance angle, actually. There's a second romance in this book. A twofer. Is that Lucia, her employers are this like loveless, business couple. They got married mostly for finance and convenience reasons, and it's described in the book that their wedding night had, let's call it a misunderstanding. That's kind of like spoiled their relationship ever since. They're a completely just financial, business, couple. They really have, there's zero romance left in their relationship. Never it really existed. So in Lucia and her story of competing in this competition to see who will be the next, king's magician, as that's a happening, it's actually pushing these two noble people, the husband and wife, in close proximity to each other, both leading up to the competition and during the competition. And it actually seems like it might be sparking a bit of romance between these two. And, I'm kind of interested to see where this is going. This is kind of an interesting, middle-age romance between a married couple that, who are just kind of in an arranged relationship. So I'm kind of excited to see, well, maybe there will be a good romance and not just the creepy romance that I'm not that interested in. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about the romance thing. Maybe comment down below and say whether or not this is a kind of story that you're fine with, or do you find it creepy like I do? I don't think there's a right answer here. This is definitely a personal preference question. So at the point of the book I'm at, they've now completed they're doing the magical competition, and it's going to be done in 3 steps. The first step is just a demonstration of power. The second step is a religious demonstration. Basically, you need the clergy to sign off on what you're doing is not the devil's work. And then the third trial will basically be how useful you are to the king. And it sounds like maybe the king might be the judge in that case. So at the point where I'm at, they've only completed the first trial. And that's where you really get to see all of the different competitors' powers. And where Lucia really just wows. She goes from basically, small practical magic at the very beginning of the story to basically being like, boom, big magic during this competition. And I don't know if this is the kind of magic she's doing. kind of, I mean, I'm just gonna say it would actually justify the Inquisition. Because the Inquisition in general was just pretty miserable. They're looking for heresy, and the heresy is like, oh, I believe something slightly different than you, therefore I'm a monster, being tempted by the devil. Whereas like she's doing like legit magic that could like have huge effects, and so it's you know I'd actually think if this were in the real world, this would actually kind of justify their mission. So I find that actually very curious and kind of fun. Where do I think the book is going to go from here? So for me, I feel like this book, it has the feel of a tragedy rather than like a happy romance. It it reads like a tragic story. It's a very slow car crash or train wreck that's happening, but it feels like it's gonna happen. And it's hard to really, I'm trying to, without spoiling anything, I don't really want to explain why I feel that way, but like everything about this feels like it's such an oppressive society, and they're and if they discover her secret heritage, that's going to be so much worse. And they're going to have to. I mean, why else would you set the book during the golden age of Spain? Because while you might have heard the phrase, no one expects the Spanish Inquisition.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
The reality is, everyone expects the Spanish Inquisition. If you're setting a novel during this time period, the Spanish Inquisition is going to be involved. There's no way it's not going to be involved. Otherwise, you would have set it at basically almost any other time and place. So, by setting it at this time and place, it's because the Inquisition is going to matter. It may not be a central focus of the story, but it's going to matter to this story. And so far, it's only been kind of hinted at. So I don't feel that their full influence has happened yet. And unfortunately, when it happens, because of her heritage and the fact that she is practicing magic in a world where magic would often just be the devil's work, yeah, it's probably not going to be good. So I'm sitting here and I'm trying to think, like, if this feels like a tragedy, where does this book go from here? Does it go even more tragic, or does it go a different angle? For me, I kind of want to see Lucia go full Carrie, like turn her powers into like righteous, you know, vengeance against her oppressors, both the nobility and the Inquisition. I think she has the power and the ability to really just, burn it all down. And I would kind of want to see it happen. I think that would actually be great. And so, Carrie, that would be a great ending for me, but I don't think that's where this is going. Fortunately, like I said, that's more of a action horror type of storyline. This, like I said, it feels a lot more like a tragedy. And in a tragedy, that kind of means this book is not going to end well. Now, that doesn't mean that Lucia is going to die. It could just mean that the romance is going to sour. Maybe that's the subversion. So I am really excited to see where this goes. Is this going to go full tragedy like I think? Is it going to subvert the romance story, or is it going to lean it even more into that romance angle, and this becomes like a, Bonnie and Clyde, or us versus them romance where they're running from the state and trying to escape the Inquisition or something. Yeah, that seems plausible. So I am excited. I want to see where this goes. Like, what's going to happen with the different magical characters. Like I said, we have 4 different competitors. Each one of them does different kinds of magic. What's going to happen? Like, is this competition going to go very cutthroat? Is the Inquisition going to get involved? I mean, I think they kind of have to, but that's my opinion. So I'm excited about this book. I can't wait to see how this turns. Is the romance angle going to go one way, or is it going to go full into, um, you know, creepy ancient guy and young girl romance, or is it going to subvert that in some way? I don't know. I'm really curious about this story. This has been actually a really good book so far. Lena made a great choice. I am happy to be reading a book that I certainly never would have picked for myself. And this has been a great read. I think there's time. Why don't you? Say pick it up. This isn't sponsored. We pick our own books. And we're just trying to essentially treat this like an adult book club. We're essentially encouraging each other to go outside of our boxes and of what we normally read, and maybe can help you do the same. If this is not normally your kind of book, but you like, dark fantasy, eh, this might be a good choice for you. Be sure to come back next week. Maybe you've read along by then, and we'll do a final review on the book as a whole. Lena will be here. We will discuss the book and kind of add it into our books that we've read so far on the show, kind of see where it fits in the hierarchy of books. So make sure you come back next week. Hit the like button, subscribe if you want to see more about this, and especially if you want to be notified when we come back for the final review next week. And until then, be safe and hope to see you next time.